Bowyer Bell, author of The Irish Troubles. Why do you think a book on this subject will sell in the United States?
It's been a premier problem for 25 years, a spectacular one in some cases. And people, even if they're not going to get through all the 1,000 pages, are going to be able to say that they have the final word on it on their shelf.
How did you get interested in it?
By mistake. I was interested in political violence and was looking for an organization who spoke English and was dedicated to the gun. And 30 years ago I went to Ireland and discovered the IRA, and I, in a sense, never got out of Ireland since then. It's an unusual book in modern history that I lived through most of it and attended many of the events without knowing, of course, I was going to write about them later on.
In the back, you say you had 10,000 hours of conversation.
Yes, many of the conversations were different, but it's an enormous length of time to spend on something. But my intimacy with an underground movement was unique, and I felt it was an opportunity not to be missed. And besides, the Irish talk a great deal.
How much of that is on tape?
You don't tape illegal people. It makes them nervous.
How many of the people in those 10,000 hours were illegal?
Well, I never ask anybody if they're in the IRA or the UDA or any place else. I just assume that they are, but a substantial amount.
Let's start with a couple of definitions. What is the Irish Republican Army?
Well, it depends, of course, who's doing the defining, but it's the armed aspect of the Irish Republican movement, which evolved way back in the 18th century and has sought a united Ireland, free, Gaelic, independent, with a Republican government since the 1840s. And organizationally, the IRA is made up of an Army Council and of a General Staff and probably 400 active and several thousand inactive members.
Where's its headquarters?
Wherever the Army Council meets, which is usually every 3 weeks, somebody's kitchen near the border in Northern Ireland.
But it is in Northern Ireland.
Well, sometimes south, sometimes north. As far as the Republicans are concerned, there's just one Ireland.
How many Americans have Irish descent in their families?
I haven't a clue. Sometimes you think that nearly everybody does on St. Patrick's Day. By the 1960s, most of the Irish Americans had become more American than Irish. They were like, say, President Reagan was, that they had almost forgotten that they were Irish. But because of the Troubles, there's been a greater and intensive interest in Americans of Irish descent. And of course, with the immigration from Ireland, there's a whole new generation of Irish people in America who will turn out to be Americans in the end.
You named this The Irish Troubles, a generation of violence the last 25 years, 1967 to 1962. Why the word troubles? What's that supposed to mean?
Originally, the Troubles were the period in Ireland between really 1916, when there was the Irish Rising to get rid of the British that failed, and then the Tan War, the first armed liberation struggle in Western Europe, the original invention of the national liberation struggle, and then an Irish Civil War. And the Irish, having a gift for understatement, called them the Troubled Times, or the Troubles.
900 to 1,000 pages of actual prose. How come such a long book?
Because they're very troubled and very spectacular. The Irish have managed not only just to invent everything, but to show us nearly all the world's problems in one small island and the difficulties of solving them. And in the course of the 25 years, you've had nearly the entire English cabinet was wiped out in an explosion. You had 2 years of hunger strikes, so that the most famous Irish gunman of all time never used a gun. His name is Bobby Sands. He died on hunger strike. You've had endless elections and various kinds of political activity. You've had peace marches. You've had the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And I thought I was doing remarkably well to get it in 900 pages.
Who you think will read it? What kind of a person wants all that? And by the way, I want to show the audience how this is, you're talking about lots of words. You have any idea how many words in this thing?
Well, many of them are different. The people who will read it, other than those who like a good story, are those concerned with politics, concerned with Ireland, and concerned with the kind of events that take place in the world, whether it's Bosnia or Africa or someplace else. But basically, when you write contemporary history, you are trying to write it to be as exciting as possible. And so I can remember a daughter being devastated to discover that there was no more Sherlock Holmes. I hope that when you finish 990 pages, although you'll be disappointed that there's no more of my prose, you will have felt that you know exactly why the Troubles are troublesome.
When was the first time you went to Ireland?
When I went to discover the IRA in 1965, I think it was.
Where'd you go?
Well, I was very shrewd by mistake. Most of my Irish career has been by mistake. Instead of going to Dublin, I went to a little tiny village called St. Mullins on the Barrow River. And as you move away from Dublin, you move back in time. And so I was living without the center of life and lightness in Dublin. I was living back in time, and I found out what a village was like and what Ireland was like. I also found out that the only way you would get to know the IRA is to go meet them. You couldn't find them in libraries or books.
Your dedication is again and still, this troublesome text is dedicated to my Kerry, capital K-E-R-R-Y, Kerry wife, Nora Brown, who has made my troubles few and my delights many. What's that mean?
Well, I had no Irish connection when I went to Ireland. Most people who are interested in Ireland are Irish Americans. And I've spent so long in Ireland that I ended up with a wife from County Kerry. And that's who that is. And it says in Irish down in the left-hand corner, so that she can follow this if we retape it, as I love you.
And where do you two live now?
In New York.
Where's home for you originally?
New York. I'm one of the rare people who was actually born there.
Where did you go to school?
Well, my family was from Virginia, so I was dispatched back to Washington and Lee University. And then I went to Duke, where I got my PhD. And I have spent much of the time in and out of academic institutions, Harvard and MIT, and for a very long time at Columbia. And at the moment, I run a consulting firm, and I'm president of the International Analysis Center, that deals with problems of violence, terrorism, small wars, coups, and these wonderful things that the 20th century has brought us.
Was this book published in Ireland?
It will be. It's published approximately now in Ireland.
Both North and South, or both North and the Republic?
Yes.
What's the word Republican mean?
Well, I was quite shattered to discover it doesn't mean what it means here. Republicans here are quite conservative and occasionally win elections. In Ireland, the word Republican really means those people who support the IRA and the militant view of achieving an Irish republic by use of force. Now, the fact is that the 26 counties, the Irish government, the legitimate government, is the Republic of Ireland. But even those gentlemen, when they talk among themselves, refer to Republicans as those people who are in Sinn Fein or the IRA.
What's Sinn Fein?
Sinn Fein is a political arm of the Irish Republican movement. It's legal and runs in elections and gets almost no votes, 2 or 3% in the Republic, and about 10% in Northern Ireland, which is not quite 40% of the nationalist or Catholic vote.
Why do the British not allow the Sinn Féin to be heard over the British television networks or their radio stations?
Margaret Thatcher felt that giving any publicity to the Republican movement was not in her best interest, and so she prevented them from speaking directly. But the result is that if you are a spokesman for Sinn Féin, the president of Sinn Féin is Gerry Adams from Belfast, and you speak on BBC One, instead of subtitles, they dub it in, which has become a farce. All of the most effective reactions and movements against the IRA sometimes turn out to be a mistake.
Explain what you mean by dubbing it in.
He moves his lips in an English, he says his thing, you turn the sound down, and an English actor's voice comes up and says his words simultaneously, as they do in the United Nations.
Now, why is that?
Because he's not allowed to speak personally on English television. He can appear, but he can't say anything.
Who is Gerry Adams?
Gerry Adams is president of Provisional Sinn Féin, which is the political arm of the Irish Republican movement.
What do you mean by provisional?
Well, in the olden days, there was only one IRA, and when the IRA split, there was an official IRA, and then there was the new group that was provisionally waiting to have an Army Council meeting before they became the real IRA. And they waited so long that the provisionals became the dominant factor, and they're still called the provisionals or the provos. It's the IRA that most people refer to.
How many people live in Ireland?
Well, 3 million in the south and 1.5 million in the north.
What's the difference between the north? Actually, let me hold this up because I've got a map here and you can explain. You mentioned 26 counties. When you're talking about 26 counties, what are you talking about?
Well, classically, Ireland has 32 counties. And in 1921, during the midst of the original struggle, the British imposed partition, dividing it into 2 parts. In the northeast corner up there has 6 counties. They're known to Republicans as the 6 counties. To the most of the people in the south, they're known as the North. and to the British it's the province of Northern Ireland. The remaining 26 counties with the capital in Dublin are the Republic of Ireland, although parts of the Republic of Ireland, just to make it a very Irish event, are further north than parts of Northern Ireland.
Belfast is right there.